In 2025, a Chinese drone maker released a flying robot that can carry 100 liters of pesticide at a top speed of 20 meters per second, guided almost entirely by radar. It didn't build a smarter tractor. It built a reason not to buy one at all. The company is DJI. You probably know them for camera drones, the kind that film weddings and mountain bike videos. What most people don't know is that DJI has spent more than a decade quietly building an entirely separate business. Drones built to work a farm, not film one. Their newest model is called the Agras T100. Picture a machine roughly the size of a small kitchen table with 8 spinning rotors, hovering low and steady over a cornfield, spraying exact, even lines of pesticide across an area a human crew would need hours to cover on foot. No driver sits inside it, no diesel engine roars underneath it. It flies the field on its own, guided by onboard radar that tracks the crop height and adjusts automatically as it moves. For 100 years, the answer to almost every task on a large farm has been the same. Buy a bigger, heavier piece of American steel. A bigger tractor, a wider sprayer boom, a more powerful engine. That answer built an entire industry, one dominated for generations by a single, unmistakable green and yellow brand. Here's the question worth sitting with before we go any further. What happens to that industry when the actual task, spraying a field evenly and precisely, no longer needs a machine that weighs 10 tons and costs as much as a house? You get a fight that most American farmers have never even seen coming, playing out quietly over their own fields. That fight didn't start with a marketing campaign or a splashy press conference. It started years earlier in fields most Western observers weren't watching at all, with a company most people still associate with camera gear rather than crop protection. Let's talk about the machine this drone is actually going up against, because the numbers behind it are brutal. John Deere is the name almost synonymous with American farming, and right now, that company is in genuine trouble. Over the past 8 years, the average list price on a new tractor has climbed more than 60%. Some high-end models now cost over $250,000, more than they did less than a decade ago. On top of that, Deere is absorbing well over $1 billion a year in new tariff costs on imported parts and materials, expenses that get passed straight down to the farmer standing in the dealership. Meanwhile, actual tractor sales have been falling hard. Large equipment sales in North America dropped by double digits over the past year, and the company itself expects another steep decline before things turn around. Layoffs have already hit multiple plants across the Midwest. Put another way, this isn't a company coasting on easy profits while some scrappy Chinese startup nibbles at the edges. This is an American manufacturing giant already absorbing real pain. From tariffs, from a weak farm economy, from falling demand, all at the exact moment a much cheaper alternative shows up for one of its most essential tasks. Now picture a farmer standing in that same dealership, staring at a price tag that's climbed 60% in less than a decade. And then picture him watching a video online of a Chinese drone spraying a field twice as fast as his current sprayer for a fraction of the cost, with no financing plan required. That comparison isn't hypothetical anymore either. Farm equipment dealers across the American Midwest have already started fielding calls from customers asking about drone spraying services instead of new sprayer attachments, a conversation almost nobody in that industry was having even 3 years ago. If you are into stories about technology changing the world in ways nobody expected, hit that like button and subscribe. Because you're about to see exactly how a flying robot is quietly rewriting the economics of one of the oldest industries on Earth. Think about what that actually means for a business built entirely on selling expensive iron. John Deere doesn't just sell tractors. It sells financing, parts, service contracts, an entire ecosystem built around owning a very large, very expensive machine for the next 15 years. A radar-guided drone doesn't need any of that. It doesn't need a loan. It doesn't need a service contract with a local dealership. It just needs a battery and a field to fly over. So what happens when one specific job, the exact job that used to justify buying the tractor in the first place, gets pulled out of that machine entirely and handed to something that fits in the back of a pickup truck? To understand exactly how DJI pulled that off, you have to go back more than a decade to a moment almost nobody in American agriculture was paying attention to. DJI didn't stumble into farming by accident. It built toward this moment for more than 13 years, one generation of drone at a time. Around 2015, DJI launched its first dedicated agricultural drone, a boxy, unglamorous machine built to spray crops instead of shoot video. At the time, almost nobody outside China's farm regions noticed. Spray drones were still a niche curiosity, the kind of thing agricultural conferences mentioned as a future possibility, not a present reality. But DJI kept iterating year after year the same way it had already been iterating on camera drones: bigger tanks, smarter flight controls, better obstacle sensing. Each new model built directly on lessons learned from the one before it. The exact same design loop that had already made DJI the dominant name in consumer drones worldwide. That loop compounded fast. By 2025, DJI Agriculture had trained close to 500,000 drone operators, spread across 100 countries, spraying and seeding more than 300 different types of crops. That's not a niche product anymore. That's a global agricultural workforce in the sky, in places as different as rice paddies in Vietnam and almond orchards in California. No single government subsidy built that scale. No trade deal forced farmers in 100 separate countries to adopt the same machine. They adopted it because field after field, season after season, it simply did the job cheaper and faster than what they were already using. Then came July of 2025, when DJI unveiled its newest generation, the Agras T100, alongside two smaller siblings built for different farm sizes. By November, the T100 had expanded into European, African, and Central Asian markets too, appearing at one of the continent's biggest farm equipment shows in Hanover, Germany, right alongside the traditional tractor makers it was quietly starting to compete with. Here's what makes that timeline worth pausing on. This wasn't a single lucky invention. It was 13 years of relentless, incremental refinement. The exact same playbook DJI used to take over the consumer camera drone market, just pointed at a cornfield instead of a wedding video. Every version taught the next version something. By the time the T100 arrived, DJI wasn't experimenting anymore. It was shipping a mature road-tested platform straight into one of the most conservative, tradition-bound industries on the planet. That maturity is exactly why the T100 doesn't feel like a science project. It feels like a finished product, built by a company that had already spent over a decade quietly working out every mistake, every design flaw, and every safety concern most people would expect from a brand new category of farm machine. What's actually happening inside that machine, though, is where the real engineering story begins. Flying a heavy spinning machine low over a field, fast, without a pilot on board, sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. So the first problem DJI had to solve wasn't speed, it was trust. The T100 carries what DJI calls a Penta-Vision system, alongside LiDAR and millimeter wave radar, essentially 5 different ways of sensing the world around it at once. Think of it like a driver checking mirrors, blind spots, and the road ahead simultaneously, except this driver never blinks, never gets distracted, and reacts in a fraction of a second. LiDAR works by firing out rapid pulses of laser light and measuring how long they take to bounce back, building a live 3-dimensional map of everything nearby: tree branches, power lines, the uneven edge of a field. Millimeter wave radar backs that up by tracking the crop canopy itself, letting the drone hug the exact height of the plants below it, rising and falling automatically as the terrain changes, without a human ever touching the controls. That combination matters because farms are messy, uneven places. A field isn't a flat, empty runway. It has dips, slopes, power poles, and irrigation equipment scattered through it. A machine flying blind through that environment at high speed would be a liability. A machine sensing all of it, 5 different ways every second, is what actually makes autonomous flight over a working farm possible instead of reckless. Regulators in country after country have had to sign off on that safety case before farmers were ever allowed to fly these things unsupervised. That approval process, quiet as it's been, matters more than the marketing copy. It means the sensing system isn't just a sales pitch. It's already passed real scrutiny in real fields across 100 different countries with 100 different sets of aviation rules. Here's the number that sounds almost impossible for something that flies: 100 liters for spraying, 150 liters for spreading, or up to 100 kilograms for lifting cargo. Picture that in plain terms. 100 liters of liquid weighs roughly as much as an adult man. Now imagine strapping that weight underneath a machine that still has to lift itself off the ground, fly steady, in open wind, and land precisely, all on battery power alone. That's an entirely different physics problem than a camera drone weighing a few hundred grams. Carrying that much weight means burning through battery power fast, which is why these operations run in short, repeated bursts rather than one long flight. A ground crew swaps batteries and refills the tank in minutes, then sends the drone straight back up, cycling through a field section by section. It's less like one continuous flight and more like a relay race, with the drone as the only runner and a small ground crew handing off fresh legs every few minutes. That relay approach turns out to be a genuine advantage rather than a limitation. A tractor pulling a sprayer boom has to keep running continuously, burning diesel the entire time it's in the field, whether it's actively spraying or just turning around at the end of a row. A drone only spends energy while it's actually working, then sits charging while a fresh battery takes over. Idle time costs a tractor fuel. Idle time costs a drone almost nothing. Scale that relay system across an entire operation, and the labor picture changes too. Instead of one operator locked into a tractor cab for an entire shift, a small crew can run multiple drones in rotation, swapping batteries and tanks while machines return to the air within minutes. It's a fundamentally different way of organizing farm labor, closer to running a small fleet than driving one enormous machine alone all day. None of that payload matters if the drone can't actually get the job done faster than the machine it's replacing. This is where the T100 makes its real case. Top operating speed comes in at 20 meters per second, and DJI says that translates to roughly twice the spraying efficiency of its own previous generation model. In plain terms, a job that used to take a full day now gets finished in about half that time, using the same single machine and a small ground crew instead of a large piece of towed equipment. Radar-guided precision adds a second layer of savings that's easy to miss. Because the drone tracks the exact height and shape of the crop below it, it can apply pesticide or fertilizer in tighter, more even bands instead of the wider, less precise spray pattern a ground-based boom sprayer often produces. Less overlap means less wasted chemical. Less wasted chemical means real savings, season after season, on one of a farm's biggest recurring costs. Add up the speed, the precision, and the lower operating cost, and you get a machine that isn't just an interesting alternative to a sprayer. It's a genuinely cheaper, genuinely faster way to do one specific job that farms have paid for the same way for generations. None of that would matter if farmers weren't actually buying in. But they are at scale in country after country, which is exactly why a company built on camera drones now finds itself sitting inside one of the oldest, most tradition-bound industries on Earth, quietly rewriting how one of its most expensive tasks gets done. Everything you just heard, the radar, the payload, the speed, sounds like a story about one impressive drone beating one specific sprayer. But that's not actually the story that should worry a company like John Deere. The real disruption isn't a drone replacing an entire tractor. No drone is pulling a plow or hauling a grain cart anytime soon. The real disruption is quieter and far more dangerous to the old business model. One specific expensive task just got surgically removed from the machine that used to justify buying it in the first place. Think about why a farmer actually buys a six-figure tractor and a matching sprayer attachment. It's rarely just one job. It's a bundle. Plowing, planting, spraying, hauling, all wrapped into one enormous piece of financed equipment, sold with the promise that owning the whole package is more efficient than piecing tasks out separately. Pull spraying out of that bundle, hand it to a machine that costs a small fraction as much and needs no financing plan at all, and the math behind the whole bundle stops adding up the same way. That's not a tractor problem. That's an unbundling problem, and unbundling is exactly the kind of quiet shift that's already gutted other industries once someone found the first thread to pull. Picture the actual choice facing a mid-sized farm today. Finance a new sprayer attachment worth tens of thousands of dollars, tied to a tractor worth hundreds of thousands more. Or buy a handful of drones, each one costing a small fraction of that, capable of covering the same acreage in less time, with no interest payment attached. One path locks you into a 15-year relationship with a dealership. The other path just needs batteries and a place to charge them. That is the actual threat sitting inside this story, not a robot replacing the whole tractor in one dramatic swap. A machine quietly proving that one task at a time, the tractor's bundled business model doesn't need to exist anymore. And once one task falls, the rest of the bundle gets a lot harder to justify holding on to. Spraying was simply the easiest task to pull loose first. It's a single, repetitive job, done the same way across millions of acres every season, which makes it the perfect first target for any company trying to prove a completely different approach can work. Seeding and light lifting are already following the same path. Nobody is claiming a drone will plow a field anytime soon. But plowing was never the expensive part of the relationship between a farmer and a dealership. Financing was. So who actually takes the hit here specifically? Let's name the companies, because the tractor industry doesn't mean much on its own, and vague talk about disruption never tells you who actually loses sleep over it. Start with John Deere, still fighting through tariff costs running well over $1 billion a year, tractor prices that have climbed more than 60% in less than a decade, and sales that keep sliding across its largest equipment lines. That's a company already under real financial pressure, now watching one of its most reliable revenue streams, spraying equipment and the tractors built to carry it, face a cheaper, faster alternative from outside the industry entirely. Then there's CNH Industrial, the parent company behind Case IH and New Holland, running the exact same playbook as Deere: heavy ground equipment, dealer financing, and decades of assuming that spraying a field required towing something enormous behind a tractor. Both companies have started talking publicly about autonomy and precision agriculture themselves. Neither one has an answer yet for a machine that skips the ground entirely, and neither one builds anything close to it today. Now, here's where this story gets a little more complicated than a simple underdog tale. DJI itself isn't sailing into the American market unopposed. Washington has pushed real restrictions on Chinese-made drones, citing national security concerns over where flight data goes and who could theoretically disable the hardware remotely. That's the official reason, and it's not nothing. Drones flying over American farmland do collect data, and foreign-made hardware is a legitimate thing for any government to think carefully about. But talk to farmers and drone dealers actually using these machines, and you'll hear a different read on the same policy. Washington says this is about foreign control over sensitive hardware and data. The farmer running a spray drone over his own soybeans says it looks a lot like protecting a slower, far more expensive domestic alternative from a cheaper, better tested one. Both things can be true at once, and neither side is likely to fully convince the other anytime soon. What's not in dispute is the underlying math. A radar-guided drone that costs a fraction of a tractor, needs no financing, and does one specific job faster is already reshaping how farms in 100 countries spend their money. Whatever Washington eventually decides about the hardware, the economic argument driving farmers toward it isn't going away. Even if US regulators eventually squeeze DJI specifically out of the American market, that wouldn't erase the underlying shift. Other manufacturers in China and elsewhere are watching the same numbers and building toward the same gap in the market. Banning one brand doesn't uninvent the idea that spraying a field no longer requires towing a machine that costs as much as a house. That's the part worth remembering the next time a headline frames this as a simple story about one company beating another. Underneath the brand names and the trade politics sits a much simpler fact: one specific job on the farm just got cheaper, faster, and less dependent on a 15-year loan. No amount of regulation on either side changes that math once enough farmers have already seen it work. So as farmers start pulling task after task off the tractor and handing it to a machine in the sky, how much of that six-figure piece of American steel is actually left to sell?